Happy Sunday, everybody. Welcome to a special Sunday edition of China Update, where I provide you with the most up-to-date political, economic, and geostrategic analysis on the world's number 2 economy. My name is Tony. Once again, my apologies for interrupting your day of rest, but we have a lot to cover, so let's jump in. And first up, let's move through several important developments related to US-China relations. US Commerce Secretary Raimondo has arrived in China for a 4-day visit, an official visit which includes legs in Shanghai and Beijing. Earlier this week, Raimondo met with the Chinese ambassador to the United States, Xie Feng, to exchange views on US-China economic and trade ties, as well as the visit to China, which has now begun the first day. Xie reiterated Beijing's official position that, quote, "Our fundamental guidance are the 3 principles outlined by President Xi Jinping: mutual respect, peaceful coexistence, and win-win cooperation." End quote. In an exclusive, the Hong Kong-based South China Morning Post, citing unnamed sources, writes that while in the commercial megacity, Raimondo will meet with the Shanghai Party Secretary and the American Chamber of Commerce, along with visits to New York University Shanghai and maybe even Shanghai Disneyland. In Beijing, she will meet with several high officials, including her counterpart, who officially made the invitation for her to visit China. A source speaking to the Hong Kong-based outlet explains that Raimondo is expected to raise issues including the raids on American consultancy firms, as well as general themes of market access. Beijing, meanwhile, will demand further relaxation of US export controls as part of its broad concerns over ongoing containment efforts. We remember earlier this year, Beijing raided the Beijing offices of American due diligence firm Mintz Group and the Shanghai office of US consulting giant Bain & Company, citing national security reasons, which we covered at the time, provoking widespread fears among the foreign business community and likely further exacerbating the already ongoing exodus of international and particularly Western foreign talent from China. US-China relations remain at a historic low point, and hopes for this particular trip with Raimondo are not particularly high. Quote, "There is skepticism that Secretary Raimondo's short trip will result in anything substantive for US-China commercial relations. What's more important is that the steady drumbeat of senior meetings between the US and China increases comfort for collaboration at the working levels, where real progress is made." End quote. Now, Raimondo's scheduled meetings represent the 4th major official US-China meeting in recent months, along with Secretary of State Antony Blinken, Treasury Secretary Janet Yellen, and Climate Czar John Kerry. Former Secretary of State Henry Kissinger also visited Beijing in the capacity of a private citizen, meeting with General Secretary Xi Jinping himself. On the meeting front, also this week, China's climate envoy, Xie Zhenhua, met with US counterpart John Kerry in a video call to, quote, "exchange views on topics such as climate change dialogue and cooperation between the 2 countries." End quote. However, no new developments or announcements appear to have been achieved in the meeting, other than, quote, "both sides agreeing to continue to maintain close communication," end quote, according to Chinese state media. Meanwhile, on Wednesday, a State Department spokesperson told press that the US is looking for a 6-month extension to the US PRC Science and Technology Agreement, the so-called STA. Signed in 1979 as an umbrella agreement for the science and technology relationship, the STA was the first accord between the US and China after the normalized diplomatic relations of that year. It has historically been renewed roughly every 5 years and was due to lapse this weekend. Thus, a 6-month extension is quite a short period. The SDA has come under increasing pressure from lawmakers in the US, who argue that it can facilitate Chinese research into sensitive fields and could advance China's military mobilization. The extension will keep the pact in force as the US seeks, quote, "authority to undertake negotiations to amend and strengthen the terms," end quote, according to a State Department statement, without giving any further details. And speaking of the State Department, this week also saw the US State Department approve another $500 million arms sale to Taiwan, this time for a possible sale of Taiwan for infrared search and track systems for F-16 fighter jets, as well as other equipment, according to the Pentagon. This is the first major deal under the Biden administration to upgrade the peacetime capabilities of Taiwan's Air Force. On Thursday, Taiwan's Deputy Defense Minister expressed that the Lockheed Martin-provided infrared search and track IRST system, quote, allows us to more effectively deter Chinese air activity. It will help to target the J-20 stealth fighter over the Taiwan Strait in the future, end quote. On Thursday, Taipei unveiled a draft budget which proposes to increase total defense spending by 4.6% to $19.1 billion next year. On Friday, China's defense ministry expressed, quote, China urges the US to immediately stop arming Taiwan and to stop enhancing US-Taiwan military ties, end quote. Last month, the People's Liberation Army Air Force flew 163 sorties into Taiwan's air defense identification zone. Finally, for US-China developments, let's examine a widely circulated opinion piece in Foreign Affairs from this week called Delusions of Détente: Why America and China Will Be Enduring Rivals. The piece gives us a good idea of the nature of mainstream attitudes and of US-China debate in policy circles in Washington. Quote, those pushing for more engagement with China argue that the United States should test the proposition that diplomatic overtures could kickstart a cycle of cooperation with China. But that proposition has been tested many times in recent decades, and the results have been far from reassuring. The United States made concessions during that era of engagement that would be unthinkable today, including fast-tracking China's integration into Western supply chains, transferring weapons to China's military and advanced technology to CCP-owned firms, welcoming China's entry into major international organizations, quietly encouraging Taiwan to consider peaceful unification, and downplaying CCP human rights abuses. Yet internal documents reveal that Chinese leaders repeatedly interpreted such US overtures as insincere or even threatening, end quote. Now, while we're in North America, we need to take note of one Canada-China related development too. Investigative journalist Substack outlet The Bureau writes this week that Beijing allegedly tried to run candidates against a popular Canadian mayor. Mayor Brad West, quote, says he was provided evidence that the Chinese Communist Party plotted to run a candidate against him in British Columbia's 2022 municipal elections, and CSIS, Canadian Security Intelligence Service, warned him that diplomats in China's Vancouver consulate were concerned West's political trajectory could represent a real threat to their aims and objectives, end quote. In the report, the Bureau outlet writes that, quote, CSIS intelligence alleges China's top diplomats in Vancouver and Toronto have founded and directed Chinese community associations that are co-opted by Beijing's United Front interference arm to transfer financial, media and voluntary support to favoured candidates because China wants to promote so-called friends up through the ranks of Canadian politics in order to fulfill its objectives, end quote. We take note of these developments as part of our ongoing coverage of accusations of PRC interference in Canada's domestic politics. Next up, did 1.9 million Chinese die during the first wave of COVID when the country opened up last year? If you enjoyed today's episode, don't forget to hit that like button. It's a huge help for the channel. Liking, sharing, and subscribing all help. And for anyone who can go the extra mile and help me keep China Update sustainable, open for free, 6, in this case 7 days a week for everyone, Patreon and Buy Me a Coffee links are in the description below. Thank you so much, everybody, for the ongoing support. This week saw the publication of a new study from researchers at the Ford Hutchinson Cancer Center in Seattle in the journal JAMA Network Open. The report claims that 1.87 million excess deaths occurred among individuals 30 years and older in China during the first 2 months after the end of the zero COVID policy last year. For comparison, in the United States, which reported the highest number of COVID deaths during the pandemic, a cumulative 1.1 million adults aged 45 years or older died from the virus officially. This is according to the US Centers for Disease Control and Prevention. We remember that after Beijing's sudden abandonment of zero COVID in late 2022, China saw a massive surge in cases within a very short period of time, reaching peak cases within about 2 months. To date, Beijing has not published accurate numbers for deaths during this period. Even national cremation data has been held from release without any explanation. The official number of deaths remains 60,000 from early December through to the middle of January, which is almost universally rejected. The best studies trying to scratch together a rough death toll estimate tend to put the number at around 1.5 million deaths in the first 2 months. Thus, this new study, if accurate, would suggest that the real damage was much worse. Quote, "Despite being the first place to be hit by COVID-19, China was able to quickly suppress the disease through stringent measures over an extended period. Because the Chinese population had been largely shielded from infection with limited natural immunity and was not fully or well vaccinated, the sudden introduction of widespread COVID-19 infection had a devastating impact." End quote. Some commentators have criticized the methodology of the study as being insufficiently robust and unorthodox, relying on novel data points like obituary data and search engine results in China during the time. However, other commentators have responded that with such limited data points available to draw from, a watertight methodology seems almost impossible, and this should be seen as our current best guess, or at the very least, a responsible or reasonable approximation. Beijing, of course, has rejected all studies attempting to approximate a death number from COVID during China's first wave, standing by the official number and maintaining that China's policy and performance was one of the best in the world. If this study is accurate, however, it would be almost politically impossible for Beijing to recognize such a high death number, as it would showcase not only did years of zero COVID absolutely decimate the national economy, destroying businesses and livelihoods and deepening social discontent, but also failed to prevent the deaths of millions of people. Okay, that is today's episode of China Update. Thank you so much, everybody, for watching. We'll be back with regular episodes tomorrow on Monday. Have a great weekend. I'll see you then.